isn't the war in Russia or Russia against Ukraine creating an opportunity to respond to a certain situation, right? Um, and renew the image of the United States in the world. So I'm wondering if it's actually some sort of symbiotic thing that can happen, and not this binary. And only because I saw today, a headline from the New York Times: McConnell takes on isolationist wing of GOP and the fight for Ukraine aid, and his quote: "It's important for the United States to help. It's important for to help the free world." And it was this kind of grandiose talk, and I'm wondering what you think about this hypothesis that in fact maybe we shouldn't be reactive and responding, but that it's created an opportunity for the United States to rethink its position. And I'm wondering, since you wrote the book, and I know you have many updates in the afterword, but maybe after you wrote the afterword, it's been a couple months, have you thought more about this idea that now in particular, because of what's happening, not only in what Russia's doing in Ukraine, but also the relationship between China supporting Russia, not supporting Russia, is enabling the United States to find its roots again a little bit?
Oh, undoubtedly. I mean, and one of the points that I make in the afterword, and I think it's become more pronounced in the interval since I submitted the afterword, in the final version of the afterword in March, and here we are now in May. One of the reasons I think that the United States does have a strategic opportunity is in light of Russia's blundering. And again, China hasn't been as blundering as Russia, but I'll talk about China in a little bit. I mean, remember that, if you think about, and we often, in the context of the Carnegie Council, we often talk about narratives, whether domestic policy narratives, foreign policy narratives. And one of the narratives that had been prevalent, I certainly encountered a lot when I was interviewing folks for the book, when I was doing research. One of the narratives that I encountered again and again and again in conversations, in research, in reading, it was a narrative of this hapless United States, facing off again. Russia is engaged in 3D chess. It is stealthily ubiquitous. It is under behind every frayed U.S. relationship, Russia. Behind every unfair or seemingly unfair election, Russia. I mean, you got this sense of sort of Russia as being sort of stealthily, ubiquitous, outwitting this hapless United States. Similarly, China, there's a sense that America, it thinks in very, very short time increments. China thinks in much more expansive time increments. It's much more diplomatically savvy. It's cultivating its relationships in a much more strategic way. And I think the developments of the past few months have really dented those narratives, really, really challenged those narratives. So, I'll begin with Russia and then talk about, China. Russia, it is difficult to think. It's difficult to think of many, at least in recent memory, it's difficult to think of many other single actions by major powers or great powers that have constituted such extraordinary acts of strategic self-sabotage. Think about what Russia has done with its invasion of Ukraine and now doubling down on its barbarism in Ukraine. Russia has given the Transatlantic Alliance a new lease on life. And think about several months ago, the Transatlantic Alliance, remember the conversation after the signing of AUKUS, and remember sort of the strains that AUKUS introduced into the Transatlantic Alliance. Russia's invasion has given the Transatlantic Alliance a new lease on life. It has reinvigorated the notion of the West, a West that can act cohesively. Russia has given NATO a new lease on life, and it's now very likely we'll see when Secretary of State Tony Blinken talks with his counterpart from Turkey, we'll see if Turkey's objections to Finnish and Swedish membership in NATO, if those objections are able to be overcome. But it seems very likely that NATO will now incorporate Sweden and Finland. So Russia has given the Transatlantic Alliance a new lease on life. It has given the West new meaning. It's given the NATO alliance a new lease on life. What else has happened? Russia is yet further beholden to China than it was prior to the invasion. Russia has cut itself off substantially from global finance. It has cut itself off substantially from inputs that are critical for technological innovation, all in one fell swoop. And Russia is doubling down. Now, if you are, and we were talking earlier about business, many multinational corporations now are exiting or significantly paring down their operations because of just the reputational damage of doing business in Russia. And so in terms of just sort of the gap between where Russia is and where it once thought that it might be, I was just rereading a speech, or I think it was an article, not a speech. It was an article that President Putin wrote also in 2011, in which he was articulating this was a much more auspicious time for Russian foreign policy and for Russia's place in the world. And President Putin in this article was trying to lay out where he wanted Russia to be. And I'm roughly paraphrasing him, but in this 2011 article, he said, meaning President Putin, I imagine Russia as being this thriving economic intermediary between the West and the Asia Pacific. I mean, now Russia is going to be, Russia is going to be struggling to claw itself out of an economic hole, a diplomatic hole, a reputational hole. Again, it's made itself further beholden to China. So Russia, by virtue of its blundering, I think has certainly created opportunities for the United States and China. It's in terms of the timing. February 4th, 2022, China and Russia declared that they have a friendship with no limits. I think that China now is increasingly appreciating that the friendship not only does have limits, but that friendship is becoming this growing reputational albatross around its neck. And China has this very, very complicated balance to strike. On the one hand, it doesn't want to disavow Russia, and it's certainly not going to disavow Russia publicly. It wants to maintain that partnership. It shares many of Russia's grievances against U.S. foreign policy. But Russia, reputationally, again, it's becoming more and more of a burden. And I think that the fact that Russia hasn't more publicly denounced Russia's aggression in Ukraine is really incurring tremendous reputational costs for China. And so a lot of the estrangement between China and advanced industrial democracies that we saw during the course of the pandemic, the first 2 years of the pandemic, has only grown as a result of China's failure to condemn Russian aggression. So I think Russia's barbarism, the reputational effect of the reputational impact by sort of virtue of association means that this narrative that I think was kind of more prevalent at the beginning of 22 or the beginning of 2021, that the United States was down and out, the West was down and out, and that China and Russia are going from strength to strength and are strategically and cleverly outwitting this hapless United States. I think that narrative, I think, is substantially dented